The massive academy rose from the city like a giant's dream made real. Its tall towers of shining crystal metal reached up toward the fake sky above, each surface glowing softly with the quiet buzz of quantum energy. Floating bridges stretched between the hovering platforms, connecting them like silver threads in a spider's web. Students of every known species floated in and out of the glass-walled classrooms, their movements as smooth as water. Holograms danced in the air, showing lessons in languages both heard and felt, both spoken and silent. This was Vane Academy, the greatest school in all the galaxy, a place that molded the minds of future kings, generals, and explorers. It was a place of wonder, of power, perfect minds working together. And Siva absolutely did not belong here. She pressed herself against the wall at the edge of the great hall, watching the endless stream of students flow past her like a river. Around a stone, her violet skin caught the light from the biolamps embedded in the walls, making her shimmer faintly in the artificial glow. But no one looked. No one ever looked at her. Not really. They saw her, then quickly turned away. As if looking too long might catch whatever was wrong with her, she had learned long ago not to expect anything different. This was just how things were. The Valerians, her own people, were a species, built for mental greatness, their minds connected to each other like invisible threads, creating a vast network of shared thoughts. A single idea could travel across a room, a city, even an entire planet in the blink of an eye. Words were clumsy things, primitive tools that other species needed because they couldn't touch minds, the way Valerians could. But Siva's mind was broken. Where others moved together in perfect harmony, their thoughts flowing like music, she stood alone in silence. Her mental signal was weak, cracked, barely able to reach beyond her own skull. She couldn't hear their thoughts, and worse, far worse, they couldn't hear hers. It was like being deaf and mute in a world where everyone else could sing. She looked down at her academy uniform. It's perfectly pressed except for one detail that made her stomach twist with shame. Her left sleeve was pinned up neatly, hiding the empty space where her arm should have been. The missing limb was always the first thing people noticed. The second thing was how quickly they looked away. In Valerian society, being physically incomplete was almost unthinkable. Their advanced medical technology could regrow lost limbs, repair shattered bones, even move a person's consciousness into a new artificial body, but only if the mind was strong enough to handle the process. Only if the person's mental abilities were powerful enough to guide the healing. Siva's mind wasn't strong enough. She had been born this way, a genetic mistake in both body and spirit. A Valerian who couldn't bond with others, couldn't heal herself, couldn't truly belong anywhere, and yet somehow she was here. The Academy had accepted her application, though she knew exactly why. She wasn't a student, she was an experiment, a living test case to see what happened when perfection failed. The professors would study her, write papers about her, use her as an example of what could go wrong when nature made mistakes. She had no friends, no study partners, no connections at all. The Valerians had rejected her from birth, and every other species in the Academy followed their lead. After all, who would want to associate with a failure? Who would risk their own reputation by being seen with someone so obviously broken? Siva tightened her grip on the tray of untouched food in her hand. The meal was nothing special, just a nutrient block, flavorless and boring, designed to keep bodies running without any thought to pleasure or taste. She wasn't even sure why she bothered taking one anymore. She rarely ate it anyway. The great hall buzzed with the quiet energy of hundreds of minds working together, sharing thoughts and ideas without ever making a sound. To an outsider, it might have looked peaceful, almost meditative. But to Siva, it felt like being trapped in a library where everyone else could read. And she was the only one who had forgotten how she turned to leave, ready to retreat to her usual spot in the far corner where she always sat alone, where she could pretend she didn't care about the isolation that wrapped around her like a cold blanket. And then he walked in. The change in the hall was immediate and electric. Conversations, both spoken and telepathic, stuttered to a stop. Heads turned, not all at once, but in a slow wave that rippled across the room like water disturbed by a dropped stone. The shared mental network of the Valerians suddenly hummed with curiosity, confusion, and something that felt almost like alarm. Siva followed their gaze and felt her breath catch in her throat. A human, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around him without missing a single detail. His hair was a mess of deep brown waves that looked like he had tried to comb it and given up halfway through. His academy uniform was somehow already wrinkled and slightly disheveled, as if he had fought with it before putting it on and lost the battle. Jeremy Shee had read his name in the Academy's database when the new students were announced. The only human in this year's class. The only human in the entire Academy. In fact, he walked with an easy, relaxed confidence that seemed impossible given the circumstances. Here he was, stepping into a place where he clearly wasn't wanted, where every eye was on him and every mind was probably discussing his presence. And he looked as comfortable as if he were walking into his own home. His boots made sharp clicking sounds against the smooth floor, a jarring noise in a hall where words were rarely needed and silence was the norm. Each step seemed to echo longer than it should have, drawing even more attention to his presence. And then, against all logic and reason, he looked straight at her, not at the golden-skinned Valerians seated in their perfect, elegant formations, at the center tables, not at the reptilian scholars of the Kavari delegation, with their ancient wisdom and carefully maintained dignity, not at the synthetics whose holographic forms flickered in and out of view like living ghosts. No, he looked directly at her, Siva, the broken one, the failure, the girl who sat alone because no one else could stand to be near her. Siva's entire body went rigid with shock. Her first instinct was to turn away, to disappear into the background the way she always did, to become invisible until this moment passed and she could go back to being safely ignored. But before she could move, before she could even think of what to do, he was walking toward her. The Valerian mental network practically exploded with activity. She could feel the edge of their shared thoughts. Even with her broken mind, waves of disapproval, confusion, and something that might have been disgust. A human was bad enough, but a human approaching her. It was like watching someone walk willingly into a contaminated area. Jeremy didn't seem to notice or care about the stares burning into his back. He didn't hesitate, didn't slow down, didn't show any sign that he was aware of the silent storm of judgment following his every step. He reached her table and dropped his own tray onto the surface with a loud clatter that made the silverware jump and dance. Then, without asking permission or even acknowledging that this might be strange, he sat down, not across from her, which would have been distant but acceptable, not at the seat next to hers, which would have been close but still maintained some social distance. No. He sat right next to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough that she could smell the unfamiliar scent that clung to him. He smelled wrong, not unpleasant, just completely different from anything she was used to. There was something clean about it, like soap and fresh air, but also something earthier, wilder. It was the scent of unfamiliar worlds, of places she had never been and would probably never see. Siva's entire body tensed like a wire pulled too tight. No one had ever sat this close to her before. No one had ever wanted to. The invasion of her personal space was so shocking, so unexpected, that she couldn't even think of how to react. Jeremy glanced at her tray and made a face. "That looks like something they'd feed to prisoners," he said, picking up his own meal. Some kind of protein-packed human ration that looked only slightly more appetizing than her nutrient block. He took a bite and grimaced. "Yeah, mine's not much better." Siva stared at him, but not at his food. She stared at him, at this strange human who had just done something impossible. "Why, what?" he replied, still chewing. She gestured awkwardly with her remaining hand, trying to encompass everything, his presence, his words, The impossible fact that he was sitting next to her. "Why are you talking? Out loud, I mean." Jeremy swallowed and then did something that shocked her even more than his presence had. He smiled, not the polite, distant expression that people sometimes wore when they were forced to acknowledge her existence, but a real smile, warm and genuine, and completely unguarded. "Because I can't do the whole mind magic thing," he said, tapping his temple with one finger. "Trust me, I tried when I first got here. Didn't work out so well. Kind of felt like someone was stabbing my brain with a fork, so I figured I'd stick to good old-fashioned speech." He said it so casually, as if not being part of the telepathic network wasn't the greatest failing a person could have. As if it didn't matter that he was cut off from the invisible web of communication that connected everyone else in the academy. As if being mentally isolated wasn't a tragedy that marked someone as fundamentally broken. No one else in the hall was speaking, but Siva could feel their attention pressing down on her like a physical weight. She knew what they were thinking, even without being able to hear their thoughts clearly. Why is he talking to her? What does he want with the broken one? What is wrong with him? She knew what would happen next because it always happened. He would realize who she was, what she was. He would see the empty sleeve, notice the way her mind barely flickered compared to others, understand the isolation that surrounded her like an invisible wall. And then he would leave, making some polite excuse before hurrying away to find someone more worthy of his time. They always did, but Jeremy just took another bite of his food, chewed thoughtfully, and without even looking at her said, "So, you got a name, or do I just call you brooding purple girl from now on?" She blinked, caught completely off guard by the question. "Siva," she said automatically. He nodded, as if her name meant something important, as if it mattered to him. "To meet you, Siva," such simple words, casual and unremarkable. The kind of greeting that happened thousands of times every day across the galaxy. But they settled inside her chest like stones dropping into still water, creating ripples that spread through her entire being. No one had ever spoken her name like that before. Not as an obligation they had to fulfill. Not as a burden they were forced to carry. Not as a mistake they wished they could forget. He had said it like she was a real person, like she mattered. Jeremy didn't leave. He didn't make excuses or suddenly remember somewhere else he needed to be. He just stayed there, eating his terrible food and existing in her space as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her, seen everything that was wrong with her, seen all the ways she was broken and incomplete and failed and stayed anyway. Siva had spent most of her life existing on the edges of things, conversations, corridors, life itself. She had learned not to expect company, not to hope for connection, not to believe that anyone would ever choose to spend time with her willingly. Yet now, for reasons that completely escaped her understanding, a human had settled into her orbit. Like a planet finding its star. Jeremy didn't just sit with her, he made himself comfortable. He sprawled across the table, eating without any concern for proper manners or academy etiquette, completely unbothered by the stares burning into his back from every direction. The Valerians, with their practiced elegance and flawless social graces, dined in silent precision. Their movements were fluid and deliberate, each gesture carefully controlled and beautiful to watch. They ate as if it were a performance, a demonstration of their superiority in all things. Jeremy, by contrast, ate like what he was, a human. He was loud where they were silent, messy where they were precise, and completely unconcerned with the rules of proper behavior that governed everyone else in the academy. Siva was used to being invisible, to existing in the background where no one had to acknowledge her presence. She was not used to being the center of attention, to feeling hundreds of eyes focused on her table, to being part of a spectacle that was drawing whispers and mental conversations from across the hall. The attention made her skin crawl. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, wishing she could sink through the floor and disappear entirely. "You should sit somewhere else," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. Jeremy glanced up from his food, still chewing. Why? The question was so simple, so direct, that it caught her off guard. She had expected him to agree immediately, to realize that associating with her was social suicide and find an excuse to leave. Instead, he seemed genuinely curious about her reasoning. CIVA. Hesitated. The real words sat at the edge of her tongue, threatening to spill out. Because they're all watching us. Because they disapprove of you being here. Because you don't want to be associated with someone like me. Because I'm broken and being near me will only make them think less of you. Instead, she said, because I prefer solitude. Jeremy made a sound. That might have been a laugh or a snort of disbelief. No, you don't. Her shoulders stiffened with surprise and something that might have been anger. I do. He pointed what was left of his protein bar at her, using it like a teacher might use. A pointer to make a lesson clear. You're alone, sure, but that doesn't mean you want to be. There's a difference. Siva inhaled sharply, feeling as if he had just reached into her chest and squeezed her heart. Valerians were supposed to be the mind readers, the ones who could see into thoughts and understand the deepest truths about other people. But this human, who had no psychic abilities whatsoever, had just read her more clearly than anyone ever had before. Her gaze dropped to the table, unable to meet his eyes. "Why are you speaking to me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jeremy took his time answering. He leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers against his knee in a rhythm that seemed familiar to him but meant nothing to her. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful, honest in a way that made her chest ache. "Honestly," he said. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Because you were the only person in here who looked like they might actually talk to me." He gestured at the rest of the room with his free hand, taking in the hundreds of students who were all connected to each other through their shared mental network. The others, they're all up in their heads, talking with their fancy brainwaves or whatever. It's like walking into a party where everyone's texting each other and you don't have a phone. I could sit with them, sure, but I'd still be completely alone. He paused, taking another bite of his food before continuing. You, though, you looked like someone who might actually use words. Someone who might be willing to have a real conversation. Instead of just thinking at each other silently, Sviva blinked, trying to process what he had just said. She had never heard telepathy described like that before, like a text conversation that excluded anyone who couldn't participate. It was such a strange way to think about something that had always been presented to her as the height of evolution, the mark of a truly advanced species. So, yeah, Jeremy continued, popping the last piece of his protein bar into his mouth. You seemed like the only person here worth talking to. That logic shouldn't have made sense. It was based on assumptions and guesses rather than facts. And yet a strange warmth began to spread through her chest, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since he had sat down. His uniform was wrinkled and slightly too big, as if it had been made for someone else, or he had never bothered to have it properly fitted. His left sleeve had a small tear that had been hastily stitched with thread that didn't quite match the fabric. His hands bore faint scars, the kind that came from doing rough work. From using tools and getting hurt and healing and doing it all over again. He was not polished like the other students. He didn't move with the precision of someone who had been bred for greatness, trained from birth to be perfect. He didn't carry himself like he belonged in a place like this, among the galaxy's elite. He didn't belong here any more than she did. The thought surfaced unbidden. He might actually mean it. She quickly buried the hope before it could take root and grow into something that would only hurt her later. She had learned long ago not to trust in kindness, not to believe that anyone would choose her company for its own sake. The others won't accept you, she said instead, trying to warn him about what his association with her would cost him. Humans are ... unpredictable. They don't like that. And being seen with me will only make it worse. Jeremy shrugged. The gesture, so casual and unconcerned that it took her breath away. "I'm not here to be liked." That surprised her more than anything else he had said. Everyone at Vale Academy had a purpose, a goal they were working toward. Some wanted to earn prestige, to graduate with honors and return home as heroes. Others sought to build alliances, to make connections that would serve them in their future careers. Still others hoped to carve out a path to power, to use their education as a stepping stone to positions of influence and authority. But Jeremy seemed completely uninterested in any of those things. "Then why are you here?" she asked. Genuinely curious now, for the first time since he had sat down, Jeremy hesitated. She saw cracks appear in his easy confidence, saw the way his hand clenched into a fist against his knee before he forced it to relax. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally exhaled, the sound seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. "It's complicated," he said. And she could hear the weight of untold stories in those two simple words. Siva knew deflection when she saw it. She had used it often enough herself, turning aside questions that came too close to truths she wasn't ready to share. She wanted to press him for more information, to understand what had brought him to this place where neither of them belonged. But before she could ask another question, a cold voice cut through the air like a blade. "Human." A Valerian male stood before their table, tall and immaculate in his academy robes. His golden skin seemed to glow with its own inner light, and his eyes held a kind of perfect confidence that came from a lifetime of never being told no, never being denied anything he wanted. The real story was just beginning. Shimmered beneath the overhead lights, his silver eyes narrowed in open dissent. Others flanked him, his unit, no doubt. Jeremy didn't bother standing. He barely looked up. "Yeah," the Vian's lip curled. "You are a mistake." CA felt the insult in the air before. The words were spoken, a psychic whisper rippled through the room, a silent agreement among the others. Jeremy, however, merely arched an eyebrow. "Always this friendly, or is it just my lucky day?" The Varian's expression did change. "Humans are unfit. For Valoran, you have no place here." His gaze flicked a Sudge sharp as a blade. "Neither does she." The words Holden have hurt. She had heard worse. But Jeremy only laughed af. Of amused, genuine laugh, the Valen stiffened a few students. Turned in confusion, Sia stared. Jeremy wiped a non-existent tear from his eye. "Man, you guys really take yourselves seriously, huh?" He leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. "Got to be exhausting." The Vian's composure cracked just slightly. "Mu. Think this is amusing?" Jeremy's grinded ant waver. "I think you're trying real hard to make me feel small, and it's just not working." Silence fell over the hall. The Valerian's jaw tightened. A telepathic wave crashed over CA, a mix of irritation and cold. Precise anger. It was meant for Jeremy, but he couldn't hear it. However, she knew. What was iscoming before the Varan even moved? The boy's hand shot forward, aiming for Jeremy's throat. Fast practiced theft strike of someone trained in precision combat, but Jeremy was faster. He caught Fion's wrist mid-strike. The room froze. Jeremy's grip tightened. Justin now to make a point, then slowly he pushed the Vion's hand aside and released him. His grin had vanished. "I don't care if you don't. Like me, Hess." His voice calm, dangerously steady. "But if you ever try that again, we're going to have a problem." The Vion's nostrils flared. His silver eyes flashed it. He didn't strike again. He only glared at CA as if it were her fall. Then he turned, sharply disappearing into the crowd, his unit trailing behind him. Tension in the room remained. Jeremy exhaled and picked up what was left of his food. "Well," he said casually, as if he hadn't justified an entire species. That was Funka's mind reeled. He had no idea what he had just done. The Varians were powerful, their social structures intricate and unyielding, insulting one, humiliating one ways. Not something easily forgotten. "He shouldn't have done that," she said. Jeremy took another bite of his protein bar. "Yeah, well, I'm not great at doing what? You shoot circus? Missing limb, octoghost sensation, a reminder." You've made an enemy, she warned. Jeremy smirked. Wouldn't be the first she didn't understand. Him wasn't bonded, he wasn't wanted, he had nothing to gain by defending her, nothing to prove by standing his ground, yet he had done it anyway, and against her better judgment. She wasn't sorry he had. The training hall of Vilarion was a monument to discipline and precision, its towering walls, constructed of dark crystalline metal, absorbed sound, creating an eerie silence broken only by the distant hum of energy. Field's Thefler beneath Circus' feet was smooth yet unyielding, its surface embedded with faintly glowing geometric patterns, ancient battle algorithms designed to shift the terrain mid-combat here. Perfection was expected of every student, moved with the elegance of a practiced warrior, their bodies and minds synchronized through an unspoken bond. CA did not belong here. She knew it. The instructors knew it, the other students knew it, but today she had been given a partner, and that more than anything set the academy buzzing. She stood in the center of the training circle, her single hand clenched into a tight fist across from her. Jeremy lounged with an ease that was almost offensive. His uniform, already slightly wrinkled, was a direct contrast to the pristine, polished students surrounding them. His boots were untied in a hall where every thread was expected to be perfect. He had the audacity to look like he'd just rolled out of bed and he was supposed to fight with her. CA exhaled sharply, forcing her nerves into submission. This was a mistake. The academy should have left her out of this exercise, as they always had. Forcing her into a bonded combat trial was cruel. She had failed every attempt before she would fail this one. To Jeremy didn't seem concerned. "Oh," he said, rolling his shoulders. "How exactly does this bonded combat thing work? We hold hands, do a trust fall." CA didn't a glance at him. "It requires synchronization, right?" Jeremy nodded. "Which means," she turned, leveling him with a cool stare, "it means we have 2 fetas, one mind, predict each other's movements, anticipate shifts in the battle before they happen. A perfect union between warriors." Jeremy smirked. "Oh yeah, this is going to go great." A ripple of amusement flickered through the Vion psychic Lingsay, felt it pressing against her mind, subtle conditioning. She hated that she could feel them, even if she could never join them. She wasn't supposed to be here, and no, she was dragging a human down with her. "Professor," Lion stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. "Combat partners will engage in a standard trial against a bonded Valerian unit. Synchronization will determine your ranking. Begin when ready." Circa's pulse quickened. This was going to be a disaster. Jeremy crooked his knuckles. "All right, who are we fighting?" "To Valerian students." Stepped forward, precise, poised, and undeniably lethal. They moved in absolute unison, their steps perfectly measured. They didn't even need to look at each other. Their minds were already linked, their bond an unshakable bridge of shared thought. CA and Jeremy, they weren't even standing at the same angle. Jeremy tilted his head. So we got telepathic ninja twins. Neat. The variant opponents did not react. They didn't need to. Their minds should already assess the fight before it even began. SAA felt her throat tighten. She had fought bonded Valerians before she had. Never one. Professor Lion raised his hand. Everything happened at once. The first Valerian lunged too fast for a human to follow. CA moved, instinctively shifting sideways to block, only for the second opponent to cut her off, forcing her into a weaker position. Jeremy, predictably, was nowhere near where he should have been. The Vion strike aimed directly at Circa's explicit ribs. She braced for impact, and then Jeremy did something stupid instead. Off-blocking. Like a trained fighter, he stepped into the attack, catching the Valerian's wrist at the last second instead of stopping the force. He redirected it, twisting just enough to send their opponent staggering. Kaz's breath caught. That wasn't psychic precision. That was improvised instinct. Valerians hesitated, a flicker of confusion passing through their link. Say knew why. Jeremy fought like chaos. The second Viren adjusted instantly, twisting towards Civ. In his seamless counterstrike, Siva tried to dodge. Too slow, but Jeremy was already moving again. This time she moved with him. It wasn't a bond, it was reaction. Jeremy didn't anticipate her movements. He didn't need to. He just adapted his body, shifting into the spaces where she wasn't there. Opponents faltered for the first time. CA was not a liability, and for the first time, Chef felt herself pushing forward instead of falling behind. The Valerians readjusted. The psychic link between them pulsed, strengthening as they recalibrated their strategy. Their attacks became sharper, faster, relentless. Siva and Jeremy fought back, not as a bonded pair, not as a single mind, but as something different. Jeremy was unpredictable, adjusting his stance at the last second, moving in ways that made no logical sense. Saya had spent their whole life failing to fit into Valerian precision. Now, for the first time, she didn't have to. She let herself fall into his rhythm. Not perfect, not telepathic effective. She saw the moment the Valerians realized they had lost control of the fight. It was a brief flicker, so brief that no one but CA would have noticed. They hesitated. Jeremy exploited it immediately, struck low, forcing one of them off balance. Sa'a caught the shift and redirected. The second opponent's attack, before they could recover the match, ended in a stalemate. Silence fell over the hall. Circa's breath was ragged. Her heart pounded. She had fought in a trial before. She had always lost. She had never lasted this long. Professor Lyons studied them for a long moment before nodding. Gon's acceptable. A murmur spread through the crowd. Jeremy wiped sweat from his brow, grinning. Hell yeah. We're acceptable. Siva didn't speak. She was still trying to process what had just happened. She had fought with no one. She had bonded with no one, but for the first time in her life she hadn't fought. Alonvine Academy thrived on control. The corridors pulsed with quiet efficiency, students moving in perfect synchrony, their thoughts intertwining. In the silent language of Thivarians, every step, every glance, every decision was calculated. SAA had spent their entire life on the outskirts of Tyria. I've scanned her life on the outskirts of Tyria May. I've scared this in the court like, look at this. And we all know I've been exploring that path. And we scared speeds as I went. In a law of name language of the Azels. ML every lies. Every Kaz. To me. I'll see with K lines. 7 scarcewise EHLATA QA6. Kanait Krie. Kanethol can we sick a can you teed we sick 1 8 qui lie to 5 can you rekida with sick we do we can we with the you to see when I we to sui we you to get the you we to sit or kai what to what I got to see with it I for that order a ghost drifting through a world thought had no place for her. But now she wasn't invisible anymore. And that was dangerous. The moment she and Jeremy had stood their ground in the combat trial, everything had changed. She had felt it the second they left the training. Halthway's eyes lingered a moment too long, the way whispers followed in there. Weak and not the usual dismissive murmurs, but something more calculated. Jeremy, of course, didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. You realize we made history today? He said, grinning, as they walked through the Academy's towering corridors. First human Valen fight pair that didn't immediately crash and burn. We should get a medal or something. See? I shot him a look at, was the stalemate details. He waved a hand. The important thing is, we didn't. You almost did, Jeremy smirked. Yeah, but I didn't. That's what makes it impressive. She exhaled sharply and kept walking. He followed. She had assumed he would a sapper after the tree returned to whatever reckless existence he had before he decided to sit next to her that first day. Instead, he had stuck close, as if they were an actual unit, and no, everyone was watching. She could feel their silent judgment like static in Thayer. The Valerians had always ignored her, before dismissing her as a failure, but no. She was a problem because she had bonded with Chip. No one yet somehow how Shahad fought beside a human. It wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. Jeremy sighed dramatically. Man, I really thought doing well in a fight would make people like me more guess. I'm still public enemy number 1, SAA kept her voice low. They're trying to figure out what you air. He raised an eyebrow. A guy who can throw a decent punch, a human who didn't fail. Jeremy's grin faltered slightly. He shoved his hands into his pockets. HECS, I'm ruining their whole humans are useless. Theory Sita didn't answer because the truth was he was, and Vale ran. Wouldn't let that gun attest. The first sign of trouble came the next. Morning Caver arrived at her usual training station only to find it gone. Her access code had been revoked. Training program she had been assigned to, one of the few she had ever been allowed into, had been erased from system. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the rejection message flashing across the holographic display she had expected. Retaliation, just not this quickly. Well, that's not subtle. Jeremy said, appearing beside her, shuddering sharply. What are you doing here? He shrugged. I figured if you didn't show up, it meant someone was messing with you. Looks like I was right, Saya clenched. Her jaw. This was a message not just to her, but to Jeremy. The Academy wouldn't accept what they had done. This was a mistake, she muttered. Jeremy, frown fighting. Well, letting you stay close, she met his gaze. You don't understand how this place works. Jeremy crossed his arms, then explain it. She exhaled. Valorant doesn't need to punish you openly. They just make it so you don't exist. Training access revoked, dorm reassignments, no combat trials nor sources. You become Jeremy. Blinked. Wow, they're real-appealing. The passive-aggressive power move. This isn't a joke. I know his tone was quieter than usual, more serious. She hesitated. He was listening, not brushing her off, not making light of it, listening, and that made her next words harder to say. You should stop sitting with me. Jeremy studied her unreadable. You want me to know, but that didn't matter. It's the logical choice, said. Instead, if you separate from me, they'll let it go. Jeremy tilted his head. And if I don't? She didn't answer because knew exactly what would happen if Hecep, standing beside her. The Academy would break him. She had seen it happen. Bear. Two students who stepped out of line, who resisted the structure, who refused to caneform. The Academy didn't need violence to eliminate threats. It just wore you down until you either complied or disappeared. Jeremy sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, Siva, I get what you're saying, really, I do. Then he looked at her, and the reckless amusement, the easygoing arrogance, it was gone. I don't leave people behind. A simple statement. Unshakable, it made something tighten Inca's chest, something unfamiliar and unsettling before she could respond. A sharp voice interrupted Jeremy's solace. They both turned, standing. In Thekarider was Professor Lin. The Valerian instructor was readable as ever, but his silver eyes rested on Jeremy with calculated precision. The head counselist requested an audience. Jeremy blinked. Why? That is not for me to. Sokka's stomach twisted. This was too fast. She had expected the Academy to turn against them eventually, but within a single day Jeremy shot her a look. Kasim. Making a name for myself. This am funny. He sighed but nodded. I know Thintalen. All right, lead the way. Sia watched them go, an unfamiliar weight settling in her gut. She had warned him. She had told him this would happen. Bov hadn't left, and now she wasn't sure if he ever could. The council's judgment's chamber was massive, its walls lined with pulsing crystalline structures that resonated with the energy of the Valerian elders. Jeremy stood in the center, his stance relaxed but not careless. The elders sat in a curved formation, their expressions unreadably, their presence heavy, even without a psychic link. Jeremy could feel through it, of their collective thoughts pressing against the air. One of them spoke. You, airy, disruptive. Jeremy sighed. Yeah, I get that a lot. Another elder's gaze sharpened. Your presence challenges our structure. Jeremy tilted his head. Because I fought well. A pause, then because you fought well with Hergrames. Smirk faded there. It was the real reason. It wasn't just about him being human. It was about CA. Because she was never supposed to function here and now with him. She had Jeremy. Exhaled, crossing his arms. Let me guess, you're going to tell me to stay away from her? The elders did not answer because they didn't have to, and for the first time, Jeremy realized this was not a warning. It was a test. Would he comply, or would the Academy make him disappear? Hes squared his shoulders. They were about to find out. The halls of Vale Ren felt colder than usual. CA had walked these corridors for years, always keeping her head down, always avoiding notice. Now, for the first time, that was impossible. Jeremy K had done the one thing the Academy couldn't tolerate, They had disrupted the order the Valerians weren't ignoring her anymore. They weren't dismissing her as a lost cause, a defect, a mistake. They were watching their silver. Eyes followed her as she moved through the academy, their thoughts brushing against her mind like distant whispers she could never quite hear. They were waiting for what she didn't know, but she could feel it closing in. Anthon Jeremy walked out of the council chamber, his face unreadable, and she knew their time had run out. The final warning. Saya found him where she expected, on the observation deck, leaning against the railing, staring out at the endless sprawl of space. The light from the planet below cast shifting rings of gold across the Academy's metal flooring, a reminder of just how high they were above the rest of the galaxy. He didn't turn when she approached. It gave you a choice, not a question. Jeremy exhaled slowly. Yep. She waited, and then quietly, they want me to leave you behind. Something in her chest twisted. She had now. This was coming, had braced for it. It didn't make it hurt any less. She forced herself to nod. Then you should, Jeremy let out a sharp laugh, not amused, not angry, just tired. You really think that's going to happen? You don't understand. She tightened her grip on the railing. The Academy doesn't need to punish you. They just erase you. No record, no explanation. One day you exist, then X'd. She stopped herself. Jeremy glanced at her. His dark eyes searched her face, reading something she wasn't saying. What happened? He asked, Circa's stomach. Nodded. What? You said you've seen them erase people before? He turned fully to face her, who she shouldn't answer. She had spent years burying the memory, pretending it didn't exist. But Jeremy was waiting, and somehow he was the only person who had ever waited for her. So she told him it was another studying years ago. Jalen, she swallowed. He wasn't like me. He was strong, brilliant, but different. He started asking questions about the Academy, about its rules. He wanted to know why some of us didn't fit into the bond network. Jeremy stayed silent. One day he just disappeared. She stared at the stars, focusing on anything but the weight of that memory. No one talked about him after that. His records were wiped. His room was reassigned. It was like he had never existed. Jeremy exhaled slow. And you think that's what's going to happen to us? She forced herself to meet his gaze. It's already happening. The Academy wasn't killing them. It was making them irrelevant, and soon, if they stayed, they would be nothing at all. Jeremy studied her for a long moment. Then finally he nodded. All right, he said, then we leave. The escape plan. The problem with escaping Vale Aaron was that no one ever left. It wasn't a school. It was a fortress. Security systems tracked every movement, every access code, every transport leaving the station. The artificial intelligence linked directly to the Varian psychic network meant that a single alert would bring an entire fleet down on them. They had one shot. Jeremy, of course, had no hesitation. Oh, we steal a ship, he said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. See, I stared at him. Do you even know how to fly? He grinned. Define no. She pinched the bridge of her nose. This is a terrible idea, UD. And well, it's better than waiting for them to erase us. She hated that he was right. The training hangars stored smaller vessels, not warships, but fast, lightly armed fighters, the kind of ship designed for maneuverability over firepower. If they could get inside undetected, they might have a chance. The issue, the moment the system detected unauthorized launch activity, they'd have half the station chasing them. Jeremiah naturally had a solution. Break something important, he said, 'cause a distraction. Ka frowned. What kind of distraction? He grinned. Trust me. She absolutely did not, but there was no time to argue. They split up. Jeremy went to cause problems. CA went to steal a ship. The training hangar was eerily silent. As her heart pounded as she moved through the sleek corridors, every step felt too loud, too noticeable. Her access code had already been revoked from combat training. If the Academy had updated the security locks here, she was already dead. She approached the docking bay console and held her breath as she pressed her palm to the scanner. It flickered, pressed, and then access granted. She let out a shaky breath. Not erased yet. Ship was sleek, compact, designed for speed. Not war, not meant for deep space travel. But a ship was a ship. She climbed into the cockpit, fingers hovering Over the unfamiliar controls, she didn't have time to second guess. She had Tomov. Then the alarms blared, red lights flooded. The hangar, the Academy's A voice resonated through the station security breach. Detected Sile's stomach dropped. Jeremish bolted from the cockpit, heart hammering. She had seconds before the hangar went into lockdown. If she waited, ship would be useless. If she left footsteps running it. She turned just as Jeremy sprinted into the hangar. He wasn't alone behind him. 3 variant enforcers closed in. They moved too fast, too precise, trained warriors in perfect psych sync. Jeremy skidded to a stop, breathless. Sodern's out-distract them actually means piss them off really bad. CA cursed under her breath and slammed. The ship's engines online. Get in. Jeremy didn't argue. He vaulted into the co-pilot seat just as the first enforcer reached the ship. The door hadn't sealed yet. A hand caught the edge. Seba reacted without thinking. She twisted, slammed the emergency override on the opposite side of the hatch, forcing it shut with enough force to crush anything in its path. Then enforcer barely yanked his hand away in time. The door sealed shut. Jeremy whistled him. Remind me never to get on your bad side. She ignored him, gripping the controls brace, and then she launched, set them into space. Nowhere left to run. The ship tore through the planetary rings, breaking free of the Academy's orbit behind them. Alarms screamed as pursuit ships launched in response. Jeremy checked the display. Siva, we've got 6 ships on her ass. She focused on the vast emptiness ahead. There was only one way out. She pointed at the screen that Jeremy squinted. The lasting rift. It's a gravitational anomaly, chaotic, unpredictable, no one follows. Ships into it. Jeremy grinned. Sounds perfect. She set their course behind them. VN ships closed in before them. The rift pulsed, a shifting storm of light and shadow, swallowing everything that and toward. Jeremy exhaled. Well, this is either the smartest thing we've ever done, or the last CA didn't answer. She just pushed the ship forward. Dento, the unknown, the Lassen rift swallowed them whole. Their stolen ship hurtled into that churning abyss past fractured moons and drifting wreckage. The rift was a Bistalos graveyard of lost vessels, a place where navigation failed, where even light seemed reluctant to exist. CA fought the controls her single hand. White-knuckled against the flight stick. Gravity twisted unpredictably. The ship shuddered as spatial distortions threatened to tear it apart behind them. The Vion pursuit ships hesitated at the rift edge. For all their power, even they feared this place. Good news, Jeremy said, gripping the dashboard as the ship lurched violently. I think we lost them. Siva didn't look away from the swirling chouse ahead. Bad news. Jeremy winced as a warning light flashed red. I'm pretty sure this ship is coming apart. The hull groaned. The left thruster sputtered, struggling against the shifting grabwells. Circa's heartbeat thundered. In her ears, she adjusted course, weaving through the rift's chaotic terrain. If they didn't find a way out soon, the rift would consume them. Jeremy flipped through the ship's navigation logs, frowning at the rapidly failing systems. Tell me we have a plan, he said. SAA barely heard him. Her mind was elsewhere. Not on the ship, not on the rift, but on the last few weeks on Thethi's silent halls of Vale. On the way everyone had always ignored her. On how she'd spent her entire life expecting to be erased, but now against all logics wasn't alone. She had never intended to bond with anyone. She had never expected someone to fight for her. Yet here they were. Jeremy nudged her shoulder. CA Earth to Kuwait. Is that offensive? Vale to Kuwait? She exhaled, sharply accusing. I'm trying to find an exit. Jeremy gestured at the shifting maelstrom outside. I think the rift is trying to eat us. So yeah, great idea. She ignored him. Her fingers danced over the ship's console, running calculations, searching for a pattern in the chaos in there. She pointed at the screen. There's a gap in the anomaly cycle. If we time it right, we can slingshot out using the gravitational pull. Jeremy blinked it. That sounds like something that should be impossible. She glanced at him. It probably is. Jeremy grinned. Well, in that case, she braced herself. Then with a hesitation, she pushed the ship forward. The leap of faith. The riff fought. Them's ship's engines screamed in protest. J-Force slammed Siva against her citivery. Muscle burning from the strain, Jeremy cursed as alarms blared. This is a terrible plan. I know. The ship spun wildly as gravity twisted around them. Drift was collapsing inward, pulling them deeper. They were seconds from being lost forever. Jeremy reached over, hand gripping hers over Theontrol's together. Spiva inhaled sharply. She didn't need a bond, not the way Vian's did, but she had this. With one final push, wrenched the ship free. The rift spat them out for a brief. Terrible momenti were weightless, suspended in the silence of space. Then stillness. The ship drifted into calm, open stars. No alarms, no gravitational distortions, no pursuity. Were free. Jeremy let out a stunned breath. Holy... I cut him off. We made it. Headern to her, still gripping her hand. His fingers were rough, callous, human. Shay had spent her life believing she would always be alone now. For the first time she wasn't. Jeremy's gaze softened. So, what now? CA exhaled. Now we find a home. Jeremy smirked. Think the universe has room for 2 outcasts? CA hesitated, then quietly. I think it always has. Jeremy's smirk faded slightly. He studied her, something unreadable flickering behind his dark eyes. Then, without warning, Helened in a hesitation, brief, uncertain, assaillant question. CA answered. Their lips met, soft and unsure. The first step into something neither of them fully understood. No telepathic bond, no silent voices, just this. Jeremy pulled back slightly, smiling against her lips. Ya murmured this might work. Sia let herself believe it. Outsideth. Stars stretched endlessly before them, and for the first time in her life, the future felt like hers. The stars had never felt so vast. Siva stood at the viewport, watching the endless black stretch beyond the ship's hull. The rift was far behind them, now swallowed by distance and the quiet hum of space. They were free, but freedom she realized was terrifying. She had spent her entire life knowing exactly what ways expected of her. Even she had never belonged at Vane. Its structure had always been a cage. She understood now. There were no walls, no rules, no plan except the one they made for themselves. Should have been afraid instead. For the first time she felt alive behind her. Jeremy was sprawled across the pilot's chair, boots propped on the dashboard like he owned the place. He looked infuriatingly comfortable for someone who had just defied one of the most powerful institutions in the galaxy. Whoa, he said, stretching. What's next? See? It turned. You're asking me? Jeremiah grinned. Well, I figure you're the brains of this operation. She snorted. That's concern. His grin widened. Right. We're screwed. She shook her head, lips twitching despite herself. The truth was she had no idea what came next. They hadn't a home. No allies, no resources, except a stolen ship and a mutual refusal to Beerist. And yet she glanced at Jeremy. They had this, maybe. That was enough. Jeremy tilted his head, studying her. You're thinking really hard over there. Exhaled. We need a plan. Jeremy, okay, fine. He sat up, rubbing his chin. Let's see, we've got an entire galaxy to explore. We're probably 1T criminals, and we have no idea where we're going. He flashed a grin. Sounds fun. Essay. Rolled her eyes. That's not a plan. He shrugged. It's a start. She sighed. He wasn't wrong then. Quietly, they won't stop looking for Usterami's expression sobered. He nodded. Yeah, I know. The Villian elders wouldn't just let them disappear. The academy didn't allow loose ends. They had escape. But they were still unfinished business then. We make it so they can't find us, Jeremy said. CA frowned. And how do we doth it? Jeremy leaned back, tapping the side of the dashboard. Well, first we ditch this ship, too easy to track. Second, we change our names, get some new identities. She raised an eyebrow. You say that like it's simple. It is, he said confidently. We just have to find the right people. She hesitated. She had never been a risk taker, never made move without calculating every possible outcome. But Jeremy, he didn't hesitate, and maybe that was why they had survived all right. She said finally, let's do it. Jeremy grinned. Thoughts the spirit. A new beginning. 3 days later, their stolen ship touched down on a dust-ridden outpost at the edge of known space. The planet was a far cry from the sterile holes of Violin. Its skies were a murky gold, thick with heat and the scent of machinery. The city sprawled in tangled layers Metal stacked on metal, a labyrinth of forgotten places and people. Who didn't want to be found. It was perfect. They moved quickly, sold the ship under an alias, paid off a technician to erase their flight records, and blended into the crowds of offworlders. Looking to disappear by feed time, the sun dipped below the horizon. Saya no longer existed. She was someone new. Jeremy, of course, thought the whole thing was hilarious. "You're officially a criminal, no?" he teased as they slipped into a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of the port shot. Him a dry look. "So are you." "Yeah, but I've always had that vibe." She sighed. "That's not a good thing." Jeremy grinned. "Debatable." She shook her head, but there was no real frustration behind it. The truth was, she felt lighter for the first time. She wasn't waiting for someone to cast her aside. She wasn't an outcast, wasn't defective, wasn't a failure. She was just Siva, and that was enough. Jeremy nudged Hyrule. "Right? Genius. We've got new names, a new plaisant." He patted his pockets. "Exactly 0 credits. What's next?" SAA glanced at the bustling outpost around them. Merchants bartered under flickering neon signs. Bounty hunters leaned against their speeders. Engineers haggled over spare parts opportunities. She turned back to Jeremy. "We find a job." His eyebrows lifted. "An honest job or a fun job?" Saya crossed her arms. "Jeremy," he grinned. "Fine, fine. Honesty," she exhaled. "That's probably the best I'll get, isn't it?" Jeremy winked. "Absolutely." She shook her head, but she was smiling. They left the bar behind, stepping into the crowded street above them. The sky stretched wide and boundless. There were no more walls, no more chains. They had made their choice. Ethy had one, and as Jeremy fell into step beside her, CA no longer feared Donk Nun, because wherever they were headed, they were going together.